for the new things that are being proposed. Yeah, so maybe just to close, I propose we do this next week, that we organize this like ritual to end the stewards as we know now. And I'll pass to Juanca.
Thank you, Libby. Well, during the weekend, I didn't open the computer and I only opened it today. So there are some of things that I need to like reply. But the last things we were working on last week is that developer DAO, that is a developer focused DAO and on education, is gonna give a course, and they want us to give some Graviton trainings within their community. So we are in this outreach phase, and yeah, we also submitted the proposal in the forum 6 days ago, and it hasn't received any reply. But yeah, we are still in this advice process phase before submitting the second funding proposal to the forum, to the gardens. I'll pass to Nate.
Thanks, Wonka. Yeah. I completely agree with what Livy was discussing around stewards. I think titles and roles, we've tried them out, and for better or worse, they've had kind of an undue influence on perception and, having a place within the TEC. And so I think getting rid of them would be extremely beneficial, just to say, hey, we're all on the same playing field. Let's get on the same page and just see what we can do. Plug in where you can and do what you can. I do think we should take that a step further and start creating our new rituals that kind of continue the traditions of the old, where we kind of create cadences of participation. I think we have a lot of activity going on in kind of backroom calls type of deal right now. And so it's very difficult for a lot of people to stay up to date what's going on, to reduce the uncertainty that they're currently working within. And so I think that's really, really important that we start having public calls that are forward facing and say, hey, let's change up our schedule a bit, get that on track, and say, let's have a couple calls a week, and as an entire group, so that would be my big thing for temperature check. And I'll pass it over to Chewy.
Thanks, Nate. Well, regarding temperature check around like stewarding, I've been having this constant thought that, before the call that I had with Gideon, it was just like, like something that was like around after DEFCON, which is how the Gardens team is going to be implementing osmotic funding in the near future. And I mentioned this to Gideon because it came up as a concern of like accountability, and now that we're gonna be like putting together like a core team with very like specific and designated functions, like how are we gonna keep accountability so that it doesn't fall in the same place that especially around comms and what the incident that happened recently. But it was just like it's something that I brought up with Gideon, but it's stuck in my mind, like about how this is gonna be like affecting, not in a negative way, but like on the contrary, like in a very positive way, how it's gonna be affecting the way we implement accountability and how it aligns with our values. So we just had a call in comms where we talked about this, where we started explaining more specifics. There we go. How we started getting just more specific into what is osmotic funding and how it can like affect the way we fund our projects, and how it could affect like communications and it can make contributors more accountable of what they are delivering, and if the people in the community don't agree with how this is being delivered, they can unstake from that proposal, and the stream from Superfluid is going to be thinner. So in a way, I feel that it might be a great moment to ask the question, like, how does this complement or replace stewarding in that matter? You know, like when it comes to being like a more, let's say, like ethical guide for our working groups, how can osmotic funding be an ally in this hibernation mode? Gideon and I talked about this analogy also, like how some of the working groups is not that they have improved like their use or whatever, but they need to enter into hibernation mode, and we have to have like clear goals and clear signaling around when is the right time to get these functions and working groups out of hibernation. But yeah, sorry that I talked a lot, but yeah, I was very excited to share like some of the temperature check regarding these points and how they're going to be affecting us moving forward.
Do you want to pass it on to somebody, Tree?
Oh, sorry about that. I'll pass it to Bear.
Thank you, Tree. Yes, I think we're getting into like a transition moment where a lot of topics are getting like a lot of relevance to do with accountability, with transparency, with the new traditions and the new practices that we're gonna take. But at the same time, I think it's also important what Livy was saying, like honoring and having really present what has been done until this point. So I feel it's just like a matter of basically coordination, organization, in order for us to be able to do both things at the same time and have this transition happen in the best way possible for everyone and for the whole community. So with that I pass it to, I don't know if Maki Z, would you like to say something?
Maggie Z, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
He said he will pass in the chat.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll give you my temperature check. My temperature check is that after having several weeks of feeling kind of like, not confused, but like a little bit down, to be honest. Like now I'm starting to feel good. Like it feels like there's some things that are starting to align and some energy starting to build that will allow us to just start to feel good again, like, you know, have like freeing up energy. And I think we're getting really close to getting there, even though it doesn't feel like it quite right now. But I think today's conversation, and I'm hoping we'll be able to carry this through with maybe on like the Thursday call and the Friday call, if needed. So anyway, I'm feeling way more optimistic nowadays. I mean, we've got some work to do for sure, but I can see something emerging. And actually, Livy, I think that's just such a beautiful, I just so appreciate your like honoring of like what's come before and actually making some type of like ritual to mark the passage is super critical, rather than just kind of muddying along and like not marking that. That's such a great idea. And Nate, I'm hoping that, and I think that's the idea of like trying to transform these calls, like this time that we've set aside for this, into something else that can be more like public facing, future facing, kind of forward looking. I think will be great and more integrated. I think it will really start to build some energy back. So that's my sense. So let's dive into, are you guys all cool with diving into to this as the topic today, just like this one team idea. By the way, one team is not like, that's just like a placeholder name. So don't get too attached to that, that name. But I wanted to say that this idea has actually been percolating for a while, and Bear and NT and Rex have been talking about something like this, like a consolidated operations team, kind of off and on. Nate, I think Nate may have been the first person to kind of broach this idea with me. Like the first time I think I've talked at length about it was Nate kind of throwing this idea around. So, you know, I don't think that this is something that has been, that this is necessarily new. I mean, it's been kind of percolating for at least a month, probably longer than that, is my sense. So, and I think the other thing that's going on is like, I have felt for a while now, I've been using this phrase radically simplify. It's just like, you know, there are a bunch of things that we kind of got into the habit of doing. And it seemed like, I mean, and actually, it was really cool. Like, I mean, I think in terms of honoring what's come before, like we were pioneering the TEC was pioneering a whole bunch of new processes into a space that's really unknown. You know, it's like decentralized DAO, not just decentralized, you know, not just a DAO, but a commons. And so, you know, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that the only way we could have gotten to where we are right now is the path that we actually followed, right? Had we not tried the decentralized path, and I mean, I'm not saying we're going away from decentralized, but that particular path to decentralize, with the processes that we chose, we would have never known that some of those things ended up, you know, not working, right? So, and some of them have worked, right? So I think what we're trying to do right now is take the very best of what we have been using, and then I think the other thing that we can acknowledge is that we've ended up spending a fair amount of resources in the process, and it's, you know, it's, those are resources that we want to now free up so that we can use it to more skillfully fund the mission. And that includes like getting back to public funding of, you know, funding public goods, and investing in some cool projects that will help the commons. So I think that that's kind of like, you know, radically simplifying goes with this, like this idea of simplifying the organizational structure as well. And then it also kind of comes at a time when there's got, like, you've got working groups that some working groups right now are kind of naturally phasing out or shifting. So it's kind of all just happening like right around the same time. So what I thought would be good is, you know, as we're thinking about like what, if there is one smaller team, right, that's like much more focused, and it's not like several working groups, but it's just one group, what would be the functions? Like, it seems to me like starting with what the functions are and like what we really believe are absolutely critical is a good place to start. So I have like, I'm just going to paste into the document some functions that I've been thinking about, and see, I think these are, I've gotten a little bit of feedback from folks on these, but I wanted to start here and just, can everybody see this? Yeah. Okay. So as we dive into this, just one more thing that I'm thinking that's just kind of like a conceptual frame for how this works. Like if we tried to hire one person for each of those, then we're right back to like having another big organization, right? Like that's not what I'm proposing. What I'm thinking is that we would actually have on one team all of these functions, and that we would have a smaller group of contributors who were actually paying more money. We're paying for more of their time so that we really can get some focus from people rather than having like a whole bunch of people with like, 3, 4, 5 hours per week, that we really get some people who are just, not just here to do a little bit of work, but like their heart is really into this work. Like this is like the focus of their work, the focus of their calling, right? Like if we can get a small number of those people, that's just so much more powerful than having like a diffused, like much bigger team. So that's what I'm proposing, is that these functions are maybe covered by like somewhere between 4 to 6 people, but that there's overlap. So each function would have like one person who's ultimately accountable for it, but that they would swarm with other people around those functions. So, like let's say that, Acid Laser was doing the Twitter-centric communications, right? He would be responsible for like making sure that stuff gets done, right? And we have one person who is like on the line for making sure that we have a really good Twitter feed. But he can collaborate with, other people can kind of swarm with him in helping him to kind of figure that out. Same with, technology support. Rex has been doing a ton of that lately for us, but so has NT. And so I think there's some advantages, and actually Nate has done some of that too, right? And so has Zepti. So it's like, how do we make sure that we've got one person who's ultimately accountable, but then we've got backup and flexibility so that if people need to go away for a little bit, or you just need fresh ideas, like you need to be able to have a group of people you can bounce off of. So I'm going to stop talking right now, and what I'd love to do is just get some feedback on this list of functions. Are there things in here that are not needed? Are there things that are missing? Are these framed the wrong way? So I'm just going to be quiet for a little bit. I would love to, maybe what I can do is just kind of go around and get input from folks.
Yeah, I can start it off. I think these are pretty accurate in terms of the functions that we need to continue. I think they can be grouped broader. Maybe have kind of four separate, categories for it: communications, operations, economic layer, finances, and then like individual initiatives. And I really think that, my worry is that if somebody wants to participate in a couple of these, that's fine. I don't think we should be practicing isolation, which means, like having, 3 or 4 people who are focused on communications, and then they're isolated by themselves away from the rest of the group. I really do think the methodology in which we actually meet up and discuss these functions and what are the next steps for these functions should be a collective group decision, and setting the priorities for each one. So in a lot of ways, I think the method of how we meet with each other is really important. So I can see us having 2 meetings a week where we cover 30 minutes on 4 broad categories, and say, okay, we're going to set this up for our sprint planning, and then we all decide what are the priorities for that sprint planning for this session, and we say, hey, let's go after these things, knock them out, and have a retrospective again, and then start again, and see what we need to do. I think that the more granular we get with these functions, because there's going to be functions that disappear and reemerge all the time. And so I really do think it's very important that we, no matter how we break it down, we do it collectively together, and we can get kind of these broad areas where we can really go in depth in. So if it's communications, I think partnerships are a big part of that. I think external facing comms is really important. And we should spend a good amount of time during our collective meetings on that topic and see what are the next steps that we need to accomplish. And if people want to break out from that, like the breakout rooms that you do in Sampo, I think those are really beneficial. So if 2 or 3 people want to say, hey, let's go start a partnership with Gnosis DAO, let's go do it, and put that into the next sprint. So I think that's really important. But I'll pass it over to Chewy.
Thank you, Nate. Some of some interesting topics that I was talking about with Acid Laser is how can this new organizational model be open and at the same time like not affecting accountability? So I liked some of the ideas that Acid Laser had on mind, like having like basic bounties available like per month, but whatever funds are not used during that month, whatever like percentage of amount is getting destined for like this bounty aspect needs to go back to the common pool. So I thought that was like an interesting mechanism and a way in which we can keep the door open for people that want to contribute, want to just like some efforts, but without having like like that like the water flow like open all the time, so that being open doesn't necessarily is a synonym with, maybe I wouldn't say waste funds, but maybe not optimizing them as much as we could. I guess that's a perspective that could be helpful, not only for comms, but in a more like general purpose. Oh, sorry, and I'll pass it to Libby.
Thanks, Joey. Yeah, I think from this list, I feel like there are a lot of them that overlap. I think the most important one is partner relations, and it's the one we're like missing 100% now. It's almost like a new role, and I think actually that would shape so much of the direction we're going. It would make us more outward facing, and what we were talking yesterday to Gideon about this like DAO to contributor instead of DAO to DAO kind of thing, or like business to business. So yeah, I feel like if we focus a lot on this, many other things will come into place, like economic development. So I think maybe these two are together, as well as strategic planning, like these three. And I don't think we need community organizing. I feel like that's what we have like extra now. And maybe if we have more like business to business relations, community organizing will like naturally fall in place. And I feel like the energy we put in here, maybe we could bring more to governance coordination. So making sure that every proposal that comes is like well guided, and that people understand how to propose, and that we have very strong metrics for how to approve a proposal. So I think common pool stewardship and governance coordination is the same thing. And then service operations and project management. I mean, this feels like it's being accounted for already and how praise is structured. And then the curation service, maybe there's like a similar setup that could be done, that it's like, oh, this is it, this is how it works. We don't need to be like revisiting. It's something that the proposal from the common pool pays for the services already, is like all in a package included within. And then technology support, I don't think we need technology support if we don't focus so much on Discord. That's also what we chatted about. Like, Discord took a lot of our development power, so we built this huge structure that needs a lot of maintenance. But if we don't need all of that anymore, I feel like technology support would be just for emergency cases and not something we need in our like immediate operations. And then accounting and transparency. I agree with you that there's probably a lot from osmosis funding that we can integrate in how we're doing things. That it's kind of similar to the proposal inverter too. And I like that post Mert had on how inverter could help the TEC with accountability. So I feel like if we start to look at this tools that already exist and just how we can use them, and not so much having like this crazy structure within. And of course, the calls, like we need to understand what is the max we can automate from the transparency we had already been providing, and what can't be automated, to understand like, is this necessary right now, or we can put it on hold. And I'll pass to Bear.
Thank you, Libby. Yeah, trying to trying to follow what Nate and Libby have been saying about these functions in regards to kind of like grouping them into bigger categories or areas. That's something that I've been putting a lot of thought lately. And I think, in my opinion, because yeah, I agree that some of them could overlap, or maybe like each of us have different definitions for what they mean, and that could become confusing at some point. So I think that if we kind to take a step back and try to look for these bigger areas that absolutely 100% need to be covered within the TEC, I think that could help us a lot. And in that regard, what I've been thinking, I think these six following areas should be contemplated in order to include that. I don't know if you want to write them down, Gideon. There, I think we should have like this area with the corresponding functions underneath, called something like strategy, overall strategy or direction of the TEC. Then an area for people, that I think there we could include everything to do with contributors, like users, partnerships even, and of course like a lot of functions and specific activities will be able to fall in different areas at the same time, right? That's also important to know. But then people, then another one would be like production or value production, like all of these support services that we start building, economic development, sample, I can think about all that. And then communications, I think it's also like a super important and big area. Operations, I think that would be also another important one that has been having a lot of energy recently, and that I personally, I do see the need for having some clear functions over there. And the last one is finance, right? Reporting, budgeting, cost analysis, all of these tasks, I think, are important. So I think between these 6 areas, at least in my mind, I think we could cover a lot of the important activities that need to be covered, and then we can start designing like the different specific functions, tasks, go into the more granular work of them, and go from there. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say for now. I'll pass it to Juanca.
Thank you, Bear. Yeah, I agree, and I also like the idea of that Libby brought of ritualizing, because like somehow if we don't ritualize it, we will still have this gray area, and at the same time there's other thing that maybe we're not talking about too much, but should be something really key in this process, and it's how are we going to choose these people? We had the structure that Tam proposed on the comms stewards and the advisor stewards, and we are now thinking on the responsibilities that this group will assume, thinking of a unified group of all the operations of the DAO. But at the same time, there is like a political process, and sometimes we don't like political things, but sometimes it's inevitable. And how are we going to make this governance over this group of people? And yeah, that's something that I wanted to add to the topics that we're discussing. And I'll pass to Mitch. We are reviewing the functions that are weekly agenda.
Mitch, do you need some more context at all, or do you feel like you got it?
Well, I don't want to hold you guys up by me being late. Maybe give me a quick 20 seconds and then I'll just try and catch up.
Yeah, sure. So basically, this idea of like having a team that's like a simplified team to kind of reduce the overhead that we've had as an organization, as a common so far, has been kind of percolating for a while. So this is like one attempt at kind of just like looking at like, okay, for a team like that, what would be the core functions that would be on that team? Like, if we were really simplifying things, what would we need to get it down to? Is this too much? Is it too little? What, there are overlaps, that kind of stuff.
So would this replace the concept of working groups being like work streams essentially?
Exactly.
Okay. Obviously, from my perspective, I look at it and I wonder where, okay, I see praise in there under one. Praise, service operations and project management. So that would be where our reward system or something would fall under. Right? Or wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes to the thing that Livy was saying, is I think that there's overlap here between the contributor and governance coordination too. So that's like, praise is also a contributor coordination function. So it's there's like part of it is like it needs to be run like a service, just like curation service is going to need some person to be kind of like keeping it on track and making sure that it's going. And then there's just the kind of like what it's actually doing for the organization. So I think it kind of shows up in.
I think just to clarify, what I meant is that I feel like praise is all figured out already. Like there's a structure that is working really well, and the cost of it is accounted for in the proposals to the common pool, including all the operations. So it feels like almost like its own thing, but yeah, what do you
It's
think?
sort of a closed loop in itself,
Any other thoughts, Mitch, aside from the praise comment?
No strong opinions. Just I'll just listen in. Just making sure my little corner of the comments is taken into account.
Okay. Well, okay. So let me just and I don't know, Makize, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but can you do you have anything that you'd like to add? And if you want to pass, you can just say I pass again in the comments. Okay, I'm going to take that as a pass. Okay, fair enough. So I think there's a button. So this is really good input feedback. Let me share one thing that I've been thinking a lot about. Oops, hold on. So I'm trying to figure out how we do this in a way that allows us to remain flexible and not recreate functional structures again. Like there's one team, but then we've got here's this little cluster that's over here, and there's this cluster over here. Are there ways for us to like keep it pretty modular in terms of like some core tasks that we know have core roles or core functions that we know need to happen, and then allow us to really kind of more like swarm. So what I've tried to do here, and I mean, this is just like a first pass, right? I just pulled this together very quickly just to kind of like illustrate conceptually what I'm thinking about. But like, you can see here that there's kind of a cluster. If these are individual people, and one person may end up being accountable for more than one circle. Let's just assume that for a sec, because otherwise it gets very difficult. There still might be some kind of if you think about this like a network, right? Like what we're describing here, what I'm trying to explore is more of a network structure where it's really just like these people who are on a team. And this group of people may just naturally over time find that they're working together a lot with each other, right? That there's just economic development and partner relations and strategic planning, these kind of go together, right? So there's like a natural network here. The economic development and service operations and project management, same thing, right? You kind of get the sense of what I'm talking about here. So the colors might be like some individuals who might share some responsibilities, right? So it might be like, maybe this is acid and, working with somebody who's doing partner relations, they're both maybe covering community organizing, for example, right? That's kind of what I'm, and I think the other thing is to go back to something Nate said. I think it would be a mistake if we just fractured again and then just started having individual meetings, right? That just puts us right back. Maybe we're not calling it working groups, but it just puts us right back into kind of where we were before. So having, the ability to swarm and to have like a relatively small group of people to be able to help each other with problem solving specific problems, right? Specific challenges that we're facing, to be able to say like, hey, for ACID to be able to say, hey, we need to support the curation service, and I'm really struggling right now. I need some help with like coming together with some Twitter threads, right? And then to be able to dedicate like a half of a meeting with the whole group to just doing that, right? Doing brainstorming. And I guess the last thing I was going to say is that what would be great is if we got to a place where the person who is accountable for a particular function, we just get better and better at being facilitators, for our own area. Like, so in a call like this, if we were swarming around like Twitter streams, right, for the curation service, that ACID would be the person who would be leading that and would be kind of like facilitating that process. We all are kind of helping each other to get much better at facilitation. So let me see if that generates any additional rounds of thinking.
Yeah, I was gonna say some of those functions, they can be owned by individual or small group of individuals. I think of like Twitter as one of those aspects where you don't need everybody bogging down what they're doing on a daily basis. It's kind of like, hey, this is kind of your realm, but the rest of the functions that are on that screen, I think this is not a lot of these aren't recurring initiatives or functions that need to be done constantly. And so I think having a kind of a group effort and collective consensus on what it means to be common pool stewardship, what are we going to focus on there exactly, and what does it mean to do that? And I think everybody has a different perspective of it, and I think we can come to a consensus around what needs to be done around the common pool. It doesn't have to be a kind of this recurring function that happens all the time, but something that, so I think there's two baskets. There's these recurring functions that we need to have consistently, like Twitter and possibly documentation or transparency, like, recording our meetings and stuff like that. And then we have these kind of broader functions that we want to provide that we can collectively do. And so I think, having a couple people, a handful of people, maybe not just Acid Laser, but Acid Laser, Chewy, Livy, whoever it may be, to rely upon for that particular function would be important.
So what I look at here is like, you want to define the groups and then define the tasks, and then we're like, oh, the tasks kind of like fall in multiple categories, and I think that's like where people are like, things are getting fuzzy. But then what if you did it from the other way around? You define the tasks, every single task that you think that needs to be done, and then define the categories from there. right? So instead of defining the categories and the tasks, you define the tasks, then the categories. And maybe we find like a more natural grouping of things. As I'm like, okay, well, what do we need to do? We need to find token utility. Okay. So is that strategic planning or is it economic development?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that. 100%.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
the
also-
broader the categories. Yeah, go ahead, Bear. Sorry.
Sorry, Nick. Yeah, no, I also agree with that. Yeah, I think also part of my intention by mentioning like these 6 areas that I was thinking is not so much in like, again, like working groups or roles having to do specifically with that area, but more like in an exercise to brainstorm all the different activities and tasks that need to be done, and that for sure will fall in one of these categories. But then after that brainstorming, after that exercise that Mitch is suggesting, we can then, I think, start to build more of like the role and like the bigger, or like the next category that we can just like start playing around and start to distribute all the different responsibilities across people, and try to make it more of as an integrated effort, right? I think that's kind of like the main goal, not isolating tasks or not isolating efforts, but like bringing it all together.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing is we know the work that we need to do. We just don't know how to group it yet. You know, if I think of the things that I need to do, you know, in my thing, I know them all, but I don't know like how to restructure them or group them properly. And I think maybe looking at the list, and then often these things just kind of come out organically when we look at it that way.
I think there's something weird too about like this idea of distributing work, because I feel like maybe that's where we've been like too enclosed. And I agree that if there is this identification of all of the tasks, and then maybe some sort of grouping or organization, like kind of like you did this mapping, Gideon, if we could break down like what are the tasks involved in each one of those things, what we think it is, and then we could do like an open call for proposals for how people think they could be solved, or what people would like to work on, or what would be like strategies that different individuals have for different things. And we'll have a budget for it. So maybe it is a proposal that could go to the common pool, or maybe we already have a budget aside for it, and it could be just something that goes to Snapshot or something. But to open a little bit the possibility of like different people acting in different areas, and to come up with a more well thought out strategy of something that has like a beginning, median, and end execution plan.
See Gideon over there, he's sweating. He's like, oh God. Yeah. I like that. I like looking at it in like from a group perspective. I have the controversial opinion that I think we got ourselves into this mess from being too decentralized. Just like, go ahead, Gideon.
Yeah, I think that. Bless you, Mitch. I think that that's how I feel too, honestly. But at the same time, like I'm a huge believer in self-directed work teams. Like there's this rich history of teams that guide themselves, right? And like this isn't just like some recent DAO thing. Like this is like 40, 50 years old. Like you know, like it's well tested. There are people who have like done research and like figured out how to do this holacracy, and it's not easy. It's not easy, but like I guess here's the other thing I would say is that you know, permissionless is another thing that's super important in DAOs. Like, you know, like we want to create a structure where not, you know, everything has to be approved by other people in order to participate. But I think that one of the things that's led to is, especially in Communitas, man, I mean, I spent so much time with Eduardo trying to figure out ways to like take anybody who came in, you know, like, oh, we want to just be so open and like find work for anybody and everybody. And the reality is that actually is hugely expensive. And I think that we're much better off tightly constraining some particular types of jobs where anybody can come in and do it, right? But the things that are really difficult and that require some flexibility and focus, like those are the things where I think we need to like have some new accountability structure that we haven't had to date, you know? And that's kind of what that's what I'm trying to find here. Is how do we come up with a self-directed work team structure where people can get some real focus, like it's a small group of people rather than a big unwieldy team where anybody can kind of come and go, and then define some specific things like the curation service, like praise, you know, where it's open. And anybody, if they meet the protocols, like if they meet the guidelines and they agree to stay, you know, and adhere to those guidelines, they can continue to just contribute. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I feel like I talked about the proposal structure exactly because of the accountability aspect, to not leave it so open, like, oh, we are all a group of people that are already here and we've been here and we want to continue here. Like something that is too loose for what needs to be addressed. Like I feel like if we decide the roles and the not the roles, the tasks we need to have accomplished, I don't know if we have everything we need within us already. Like I wonder if we could open a little bit to almost like a more like job description kind of thing. You know, it's something that there is funding for, that we know more or less what needs to be done. And it would be nice to have like enthusiastic proposals on how to move forward with something. Like having someone that is solely focusing on partnerships, for example. How does that look like? How would someone want that work to be done, and how do they see that impacting the TEC? Or having a little bit more of structure, I guess, rather than just like, oh, this is what we need. Like everybody here, grab whatever you want kind of thing, you know?
So, but Livy, are you suggesting that we would have a proposal for each one of these functional areas?
Not each one of those, because I don't see them so separate also. Maybe I can try to draw something too, like based on those comments that I put on the document. I feel like we have way less circles than what I'm seeing in this image, and that they could be more integrated. Like, what if we needed 3 people to do this work? And that there is some type of like coordination between them that is a team. And then how that team is operating is towards one single common goal.
But are you suggesting that we go back to separate functional teams? I mean, or stay with that?
No. I'm suggesting that we go even more unified than the circles that I'm seeing here.
So more closed. I think it gets tricky when you do that in terms of accountability. Like I agree that we'd probably get better production and better outcomes, but I do think it gets kind of tricky from accountability perspective when it comes to whether they're delivering and who has the ability to remove them from that position, and it's a whole different set of dynamics that you have to deal with. And I think that's kind of I don't know, something to address at least.
If it is a proposal that has, and that's something that we could use, like the osmotic funding or the inverter structure, for example, if there is a milestone for what is being delivered. So let's say there's this like proposal for how we're going to achieve this, and then the first milestone is this, and the second milestone is that, and then and there is an end to it, and then maybe the same team can apply again, or a different team can come in and apply and propose something slightly different. Like I think I'm just afraid that we're becoming too closed within ourselves and not opening so much for like people that could have like creative ideas to how to move forward with this.
My only fear is that we just go back into the same operational problem that we had before, where you have these basically external working groups now that are less accountable, and they still are draining the common pool with not a lot of work being, accomplished. I mean, it may be better in some instances, but it's really rolling the dice when it comes to opening the common pool up like that. And if anything, I really think we should be closing the boundaries of the common pool. But
Okay. Can I just jump in for a sec, because we have 3 minutes? I'm sorry. I want to make sure. Maybe what we can do is just do a quick round of like try to limit it to like just 30 seconds. What's your net takeaway on what we've heard? Quite the range here. So just like maybe 30 seconds. What's your net takeaway with what we talked about? Who would like to go first?
I can try and summarize it here, but basically, I think the takeaway from here is we need to look at it from a bottom up. So defining the tasks that we think are really critical for this, and then like maybe trying to group those in a higher up way, and really focusing on who are core and reliable contributors, and making sure that we get the work that needs to be done, because what Nate said is before we had a lot of working groups and people, and there wasn't a lot of accountability across them. So like tightening it up and finding who our workhorses are, and like what the work is that need to be done. And I'll pass it to whoever.
yeah, I think Livia got me going with thinking about the openness and closeness of it, because there's a lot of trade-offs and benefits there. So I think that's really interesting. And I really do think that when it comes down to after we break down the functions of the organization and kind of get these more broad categories, is how we organize ourselves in the meeting space. What is the purpose of our kind of Stewards Weekly, or whatever meeting that will be? How do we set the agenda for each of these kind of category areas? How do we set priorities? How do we introduce sprint planning to make sure that we execute on those priorities? I think are really important to take into consideration when developing these broader categories of functions. So I'll pass it to Wonka.
Well, I also think that we can ask our token holders what do they think should be our priority too, because here we are discussing like in a small group, and once that we have like those priorities also coming from the token holders, the roadmap wouldn't be created by a small group of people, but by the information that we gather from the community. And yeah, I think if we get to the detail of each activity, it would be really difficult to like split things. But I think that we can think of like the size of or a number of a group of people. So like if we have 10 to 15 being too much, and maybe 2, 3, or 4 would be too small, like what would be like a number of people that we could use so that these people like divide the workload between them, thinking of these people like all around players. So like people that can maybe have some clear responsibilities or clear strengths between the group, but like having not only this self accountability, but also the team player thing. It's just how what comes into my mind. And I'll pass to Gideon.
Yeah, if anybody needs to get off because we're now past the hour, what I think is this is going to be a lot more complicated than what I was thinking. Clearly, I honestly I'm a little bit dismayed, but at the same time, like I think we need to. Yeah, I mean, I think I guess we got to figure this out. So. My recommendation is that if we can on Thursday, we do this up rather than trying to rush to try to like come to conclusions right now. And so that would be my recommendation is if we can to continue this discussion on Thursday. Anybody have? I'm sorry, I lost track of the time there. In terms of like being able to let everybody do like a summary. Does anybody have like one crucial thing that they feel like they?
I think we can continue on Thursday. It's better than rush things. No.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gideon, for facilitating this.
Yeah. I mean, it's all great input. It's just this is complicated. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Gideon.
See you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later.